this video, the Instagram generation thinks it's fun to dress up as a rioter. Morons vandalise one of Britain's finest. And I get intimidated and surrounded by members of ANTIFA. All to come.
You're also intimidated? Because I'm here to document. I make documentaries. London. What do you think about the Riots? Hey, so here I am in the centre of London, and that's Vauxhall over there. But over here is Westminster. Notice, you probably can't see them, but there's about 4 helicopters in the air. It costs a lot of money to put helicopters up in the air, and yet this has been happening all day long because of this. Now, what's happened in the US really has nothing to do with what's happening in the UK. And my guess is a lot of people wouldn't even know where Minneapolis is on the map. But I could be wrong. What annoys me about this situation today is the fact I've heard the Winston Churchill statue has been vandalised again. So I'm going to go have a look. So I'm just walking towards Westminster now. The protest today started at the American Embassy, which is that way, other side of the river. So they would have walked up from the American Embassy, down the river, across the bridges to reach Westminster. They've pretty much done this every day for the last few days. And yet they're shouting abuse at our police officers. Now, I'm the first to admit that many police officers in this country are not perfect. They have nothing to do with the fact that there's poor American policing. The last time a black man died in police custody in the UK was over 2 years ago. White people die all the time in the UK, but let's not protest that.
A little stat for you. So obviously one death is too many, but over the last 10 years in the UK, 163 people have died while in police custody. 140 were white, 13 were black, 10 were from another minority ethnic group. So compare that. If there's racism going on in the police force, why is it 140 white to 13 black? And like I say, one is too many.
The best way to describe this protest today is similar to when we had the riots in London. I think it was back in 2011 or something like that. It was an excuse for the young, for the dejected, for the people who just like to smash things up to cause a riot and cause destruction. There's a lot of people here today on the other side of Westminster heading towards Downing Street. The only purpose here is anarchy. I know many intelligent people I know support anarchy, but I simply do not. There's a lot of anarchists here today. There's a lot of ANTIFA, terrorist organisation, and others.
I get that the UK has very close ties to the United States of America. Minneapolis is 4,000 miles away from London, and yet when other people die in Minneapolis, an Australian woman, for example, was shot to death by the Minneapolis police force. Were there any riots? No. There was a white man who died in the same way as Floyd, had his neck trod on, and there were no riots, no protests.
There is about 4 police helicopters in the air right now. It's amazing. It's amazing how a country continues to spend money in a time when there's this supposed pandemic, policing people that really have nothing to complain about, policing people that have been pushed into believing this because of what the mainstream media are basically feeding them, supporting a terrorist organization that is dividing people.
So you would think this was justified because there's a lot of white cops killing black men. The stats don't tell us that. If we look at the stats, Don't get offended while I show you these stats, but look, simply, these are the years in the United States, 2017 to 2020. More whites are killed by cops every single year. But obviously that's disproportionate because the black population in the US is less than the white population. However, if we look at this stat, for every 10,000 black people arrested for violent crime, 3 are killed. For every 10,000 white people arrested for violent crime, 4 are killed.
Usually, this is where the Brexit protests are. It's usually here. Today,
so we already know that for every arrest, more white people are dying from the cops in the US and the UK. So what about the average Joe? Is the average Joe causing harm to black people? Well, the interracial violent crime incidents last recorded in 2018 would suggest not. Black on white crime, 547,000. Compare that to white on black, which is 59,000. That's violent crime incidents. Disproportionately, blacks are hurting whites far more. No crime is a good crime, and no violent crime to anyone is a good thing. I'm just saying that society is being manipulated into believing that black people are hard done by. Yes, there's been a history of slavery many years ago. Show me a nation on this planet that hasn't had a history of slavery. Every nation on this planet has a history of slavery. Are people protesting the Islamic slave trade? Are people protesting the slave trade in Libya right now? I don't think they are. But instead they're saying, we're hard done by. And yet, some of the highest paid athletes in the world are black. The US had a black president just before Trump. We celebrate black musicians, we celebrate black actors, we celebrate black authors, we celebrate black everything. And yet, there's this focus by the mainstream media, pushed by these NGOs that are financing these organizations, such as Black Lives Matter, to divide people, to have people feeling guilty for something they shouldn't be feeling guilty about, and something they should be feeling oppressed about. I know black people that think Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. Obviously, coming from myself, who isn't black, there's going to be people being offended. They're going to call me all names under the sun. But if you look at the way they behave and look at how they started in 2013, hands in the air, don't shoot. It started on a lie. It started on a massive lie. And now it's spread to almost every country in the world right now. There's these protests in New Zealand, Australia, UK, all Western nations. The French are going mental. In Belgium today, they're smashing up the windows. This is crazy. This is total insanity, especially when you look at the statistics and you look at people that just with a little bit of effort, they are getting by in life with the cards they are dealt. Very few people are dealt 2 aces. Some people are dealt a 2 and a 3 or a 2 and a 2, and they still succeed because they play that hand and they win because they put the effort in. Protesting like this and desecrating monuments, I think it's shocking. I honestly think it's shocking.
why is there not people guarding this?
That's what we're trying to do, sir.
Well,
If we see an offence take place, we'll deal with it, sir.
people right on the other side.
Yeah, the offence has taken place and that's been captured evidentially. So we're here just to ensure that there's no further offences.
You have a police officer on every corner. I appreciate you guys got a hard job, but it's just
It's a difficult situation, isn't it?
one on each corner.
What's that, sorry?
One on each corner.
One in each corner. This is the direction we've been given, sir. At the moment, if we see offence take place, we'll deal with that.
But no, I mean, it's so you got people posing pictures next to graffiti, and it's just like it just encourages it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got cameras from all angles.
If it wasn't for Churchill, I don't think most of these people would be here right now. I don't think there would be a BAME community in the United Kingdom. The Germans would have won, and anyone that wasn't Aryan, anyone that wasn't white, would have been sent to the gas chambers. So the fact that people are desecrating on Winston Churchill, who saved the United Kingdom from the invasion from the Nazis, I think that's disgraceful.
streaming for?
I'm filming, I'm not live streaming.
You're here to support the protest.
I'm here to observe the protest.
What do you think of this protest?
Jesus. What am I getting? Intimidated.
Do you support this protest?
Do I support them? Yes. Who are you guys? Are you honestly, you're honestly intimidated?
Where are you coming here? Where are you coming here?
Because I'm here to document. I make documentaries.
What about?
London?
What do you think about Tommy Robinson?
I don't know.
You don't know? Yeah, filming in. Yeah, filming in.
What was incredibly unclear there and what you couldn't see was the fact that this group of masked individuals suddenly surrounded me. They came at me from all angles, hence the reason that I put my camera down and I was sidestepping just to get out of their way. This is not the first time I've had to deal with Antifa individuals, and it's clear as daylight these people were Antifa. And hence the reason that I screenshot every individual, because Antifa is a terrorist organization and it's clear as day what's going on here. They are trying to intimidate people who potentially disagree with what they stand for. And what they stand for is anarchy. They stand for Marxism. So let's have a review of who these people are. The bravest of the bunch, and also probably the most stupid of the bunch, was this chap, the one with no mask on. The others all had masks on, hiding their identity, and if they could, they would have been aggressive. Their tactics are to surround their enemies. Why did they think I was their enemy? They've never seen me before. They have no reason to think I'm the enemy. I was simply filming monuments. The reason they thought I was an enemy was simply because they profiled me. They saw a white Englishman in a flat cap, and earlier in the day, apparently, Tommy Robinson supporters had been at the Winston Churchill statue trying to defend it from people graffitiing it. Apparently, the police moved them along, and then as soon as the police moved them along, the statue was desecrated by these Antifa individuals, these rioters, these anarchists, the Black Lives Matter protesters, all because they don't value who Winston Churchill is. What I did notice at the back of the group was an older lady who seemed to be organizing the young'uns. She clearly was in charge, and as you'll see, as I go and talk to the police officers to alert them to the fact that there's a terrorist organization in their midst, the lady comes over to try and listen to who the hell I am. She's wanting to know, am I far-right individual? They're spying on me. There's a guy sat up against the wall spying on me. It was a fairly intimidating atmosphere.
I film here. So we got a terrorist organisation over here, and they just intimidated me. No idea here.
Why do you say that, sir?
Why? Because just as I went around the corner, they all basically huddled around, basically try to. They don't know who I am. I'm nobody, but I'm just filming. But they assume I'm somebody, but I'm not. I don't mind being. They just threaten me.
What? Are you here alone?
Yeah, I'm here alone. Yeah. But you got
What's your what?
I live in London. I'm just curious.
So what's happening?
Yeah.
Oh, fair enough. All I can say, obviously, you know what's happening here. They're protesting.
Yeah, but you should.
Whether we agree or don't agree, we're allowed to protest. Obviously, offences are allowed to.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you've been to many marches before.
Of course.
Many protests?
Of course, but not normally intimidated. I was filming the statues because I think it needs to be documented.
No problem. But
I'm not filming you. I'm just filming the.
you're welcome to, sir. No problem. But
No, I don't think it's appropriate to point the camera. I know you.
I don't mind. You've perfectly fine. I don't mind. But I'm sure you know we take our orders from our sergeants and inspectors. The only thing I can advise is try and stay away from them.
Yeah.
You start there. No one's come up to you here while you're with us or just around the area. If you get any issues, come back to us again. We'll take it from there, but just stay away from them.
Well,
They will probably assume something about you.
assume exactly.
They will probably assume.
And people cry racism, and then they look at me and they do the opposite.
We're not saying they're right. We don't agree with them, but as you know, we have to let them protest. time we had to let all people protest their views in. So we're not saying we agree with
All right,
them, disagree with them.
I'm going to attempt to film the statues again.
Which one, that one?
I'm just going to go that way. By the time I got to the second one, I got surrounded.
Which one, that one there? That one.
I'd just like to go around.
No problem. Have a go, we'll keep an eye on you, and if you get any issues, come back to us and take it from there.
It doesn't look like anyone's. I appreciate you doing a good job, but it just looks like.
So there was some gentlemen here earlier in the morning, and they were trying to protect the statue.
Yeah.
They were here from earlier, I think they left about 3 or 4 o'clock.
Right.
So they were made a chain around the thing, and obviously they got some hostility. So we put a cordon in between them and the protesters, and we eventually they were coming under abuse, as you say, you are now, similar sort of thing. We looked after them and got them home, sort of preventing the breach of peace, preventing any disorder. We will look after you if you get hurt, obviously, but what I'll say is just, I'm sure you won't seem reasonable, so I'm try not to
I'm just here as an observer.
Yeah, just do your observing, just try and stay away from it.
Well, it is an interest, like this. They're a designated terrorist organisation, Antifa.
What? Antifa?
Yeah. Come on, it's plainly obvious who they are.
Which group are you looking at?
The group over there.
Okay.
They've been labelled by our government, the US government, the CIA, as terrorist organisation, and yet this is how they work. They work by surrounding people.
See how you get on, Lily.
All right. So just been threatened by Antifa, as you do.
The statue you just saw me walk past was David Lloyd George. The one just there is Field Marshal Jan Christian Smuts. The statue just coming up here is Viscount Palmerston. It's one of the oldest ones in the square. I think it was erected around about sort of 1880 or between 1870 and 1880. The one coming up over here in the distance is Edward Stanley, the Earl of Derby. Actually, probably erected around about the same time as Viscount Palmerston. That you see there is ACAB. That basically means all cops are bastards. Predominantly used by Antifa and punks back in the day. Sadly, there's nothing punk about Antifa. They're generally a bunch of lame individuals that live in the basements or live with their mums.
Horrific day. I spoke to the heads of the sheriff department, the police department, and the state police down there, and they told us how their hearts were reeling. Their message is peace and coming together in the country. What's your message?
You don't believe that for 1 minute, do you?
That their message is?
Yeah.
That's what they said to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe them. Of
Any
course I believe them
protests
when they say
over the
that.
deaths of these cops today in Baton Rouge?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Any riots or protests over the police officers in Dallas, Texas?
What are you asking?
It's a pretty simple question.
I asked you what's your message to the people. Their message is one of peace. What is your message?
My message has been clear from day one 2 years ago. This anti-cop sentiment from this hateful ideology called Black Lives Matter has fueled this rage against the American police officer. I predicted this 2 years ago. So what I want to know,
sure? Okay, Sheriff.
do I want to know?
With all due respect, do you know that this was because of that? Do we
Yes,
know
I
that
do.
As a law enforcement officer?
I've been watching this for 2 years. I predicted this. This anti-police rhetoric sweeping the country has turned out some hateful things inside of people that are now playing themselves out on the American police officer. I want to know, with all of the black-on-black violence in the United States of America, by the way, when the tragedies happened in Louisiana and Minnesota, you know that 21 black people were murdered across the United States? Was there any reporting on that?
There was a black officer who was killed today. But
Was there any reporting on that?
Sheriff, please, let's just keep the volume down here. So I understand, and listen,
I'm looking at 3 dead cops this week,
Sheriff,
and I'm looking at 5 last year. You trying to tell me to keep it down?
Just please, if you'll just please, we can keep it civil. So, because the message to people at home, I'm sure you want, is one of civility.
I wish, Don, I wish you had that message of civility
to have a conversation
toward
with
this
you.
hateful ideology, these purveyors of
You don't
hate.
know what my message is.
That's
what I want
they
to say
do.
to you is,
these
if you'll
people
let me
preach
are you going to let me get a
vile
word
and
in?
virtue
We'll be right
in the
back.
name
We're
of
going to go to break,
hate.
and we'll be right back.
I think that's Edward Stanley. I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that one. But it's just sad. I think it's incredibly sad that these wonderful monuments are being just destroyed. That's Gandhi just up there on the left. That was erected, I think around 2015 it was erected. Over there you've got Robert Peel. He gave so much to the United Kingdom, and these people just seem to be oblivious to it. And then of course you've got Nelson Mandela, pretty much the only statue that wasn't vandalized either yet the day before or today. Nelson's holding signs. Obviously they weren't rude enough to destroy his statue, but everyone else's are, because everyone else is not a black man. They graffiti all over it. Even Gandhi got graffitied on, which I think is pathetic. And what was sad, I don't have it on video, but yesterday Lincoln's memorial, or Lincoln's statue, got completely destroyed by these people. He was executed for fighting for the abolishment of slavery, and they had the audacity to desecrate his monument in London. I think that's really sad.
It's actually a really sad thing. Some of the Winston Churchill's been desecrated. It's actually a really intimidating atmosphere. Why do I say that? Antifa just came up to me and basically tried to surround me. Now, I'm not going to suddenly pick a fight with 10 people, but that was an intimidating situation. Everyone's masked up. You don't know what they're carrying. Trying to, the police don't seem to be protecting Winston Churchill. They claim they're watching. They're watching so much they would have seen me being surrounded. They didn't.
As stated previously, the loss of any life is a loss too many. The justification these protesters in the UK and the US and around the world have for protesting, rioting and marching is the death of George Floyd. Now, the last thing anyone would want is for a man to be killed in that way. And the thing is, the police officers responsible have been charged and processed. They're in jail already and they're going to prison. So there is a justice system there. Innocents die all the time. People were mourning a man who, by the looks of things, wasn't a great individual. At the time of his arrest, he was seen dropping a bag of white powder. It's on camera, you can watch that if you'd like, just do a search for it. He also had a rap sheet longer than the average CV. One of the things he went to prison for over 5 years was the fact that he was involved in an armed robbery. He broke into a pregnant woman's house with his buddies, and he pointed his loaded weapon at the pregnant woman's belly, so at the unborn child, and basically threatened her while his buddies were ransacking her house, taking the few possessions she had. This woman was a pregnant black woman, and we're supposed to put this man on comparison with Malcolm X? I think that's ridiculous. There's no reason to be celebrating the life of someone with a rap sheet as long as this. But then you say that people are protesting police brutality and the overwhelming majority of black people being murdered. The stats, once again, do not back that up. If you look at the stats on the murder of blacks and whites in the US. Now, granted, this screenshot's a little bit old. However, the previous screenshots I can show you, and I'll show you again, show it's not black people being killed by whites. Whites are being killed by blacks. More blacks are killing at the hands of other black people Yet over the course of the last couple of weeks, do people even know how many black people have been killed by other black people in the US? The stats are obscene. Last weekend, 17 black people were killed by other black people in Chicago. In the first weekend of the protests in the US, 2 black police officers were killed by the protesters. Where's the outrage for that? Or is it simply the case of ACAB, where these people believe that all cops are bastards, which is simply not true, because there's many, many fine policemen, many corrupt policemen, but many fine ones. And by tainting all cops like this, you are doing a huge disservice to your communities, huge disservice to the society, because we need policemen to keep things in order. We don't need an authoritarian police state, but we need police keeping order, taking out the bad guys when things go wrong. If you're looking to defund the police force, which a lot of these protesters are thinking, you're insane.
All I want to do is have a conversation. I can't have a conversation with you if we're both talking at the same time. What it sounds like to me is that you're accusing me of violence and supporting something, a narrative that I'm not necessarily in support of. And if that's what you're accusing me of violence, then you can leave. That's not true. I don't support violence of any type against police officers, against anyone. So if you're accusing me of that, then you're welcome to leave. But if you want to have a conversation, I am more than willing to welcome a conversation with you. I don't disagree with you about there is a narrative across the country that could be harming police officers. But we don't know right now, as someone who's in law enforcement, if that was the actual cause of it. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. Do we know that generally the American law enforcement officers are racist? Do we know this?
Go on.
I ask a question.
Do I know American general law enforcement are racist? I don't think anyone is accusing. If you're insinuating that people are accusing or saying that law enforcement across this country as a whole are racist, then your assumption is wrong.
First of all, this whole anti-police rhetoric is based on a lie. There is no data, and you know this. There is no data, there is no research that proves any of that nonsense. None.
You'd have to be more specific about what data and what nonsense you're talking about.
That law enforcement officers treat black males different than white males in policing in these urban centers.
There is data that supports
There is not data.
No. The president spoke about it. Cedric Alexander, who is a law enforcement officer.
The president has been lying about it. He said it again the other day when he said black males are 2 times more likely to be shot by a law enforcement officer than white males. Don, that is a lie.
That is not a lie.
It is a lie.
Yes.
Show me.
Research.
Show me.
The research
Show it to me then.
that we have from the Washington Post. That
the Washington Post
study.
debunked that nonsense.
There's also research.
He also said
Sheriff,
this time.
There's also research.
He continues.
A Harvard professor that also showed that black people are treated more aggressively by police officers.
No, you are
than other
wrong
people.
in your interpretation of that Harvard study, because I read the study. That's not what he said. He said he was surprised to find
that in shootings of the most severe in shootings, that he found no evidence that there was.
All right, I'm going to head down towards Downing Street. It's a little bit down here. I seem to have shaken off the rabble. And I kid you not, there was a rabble. I don't know if I got any of that on camera, but to be intimidated because I was filming the statues is massively unacceptable. And there was a sign back there that said skin color is not a reason for suspicion. They look at me because what? I was white? Why was I? Many, many cameras around here, yet I'm the one being surrounded by Antifa, disrespecting Winston Churchill, disrespecting just London.
So getting back to these crime stats again, we already know from the stats I showed you earlier, for every 10,000 people arrested, 4 white people in the US are killed by police officers. For every 10,000 arrested in the US, 3 black people are killed. None of those people should ever be killed. Well, to be honest, the US should be aiming to have a police force like the UK. As I stated earlier, in the last 10 years, only 163 people have died in police custody. Only 13 of those were black. That's 13 too many, but it also shows that they're not disproportionately impacted. 140 were white. Like I said previously, 163 people shouldn't have died, but you've got to realize that some of those people are probably dying from drug overdoses. They're probably dying from alcohol intoxication. They're probably dying because they've just been arrested due to fighting and through injuries from grievous bodily harm. They're dying from that. Occasionally, once in a while, the UK police get it wrong. But the fact is that people are chucking rocks, bottles, throwing punches, throwing kicks at innocent police officers who are just trying to do a job in a lockdown situation, I think is ghastly. People whine, oh, but black people are disproportionately arrested in London and disproportionately targeted in London or around the UK or around the US. But the uncomfortable truth is blacks commit more crime at nearly 3 times the crime rate that whites do. Blacks commit 36% of the violent crime in the US, even though they account for only 13% of the population. Blacks in England commit crimes at nearly 3 times the rate of the population rate. Should the police be ignoring these people that are breaking crime because we can't be going after them disproportionately? It wouldn't make any sense. If someone's committing a crime, then you would expect to be targeted by the police. People claim the legal system's biased, but I just don't see it. People claim that employment's biased. I certainly have never seen in my lifetime an advert saying whites only, but I have seen adverts for the BBC and other institutions saying black and ethnic minorities need only apply. Is that fair? Is that the white privilege that everyone's talking about at these protests? What people should be focusing on right now is not how they've been dealt a 2 and a 3 in the poker game of life, but they should be focusing on how they can improve themselves. They should be focusing on family values, because family values is everything in terms of the nurturing of a child and turning that child into a law-abiding citizen, because single-parent families are more likely to bring up males who will commit crime. 72% of blacks born in the US are to single-parent families. That means the father is not around. And I know for a fact, if you do not have a father figure around guiding the boy, that boy is going to go AWOL. I've seen it in my own experience. And researchers and psychologists document this in many papers. Black children growing up in single-parent income situations are likely to repeat this cycle unless they raise children in a married 2-parent household. So it continues. Boys being born into single-parent families, going into a life of crime, then having the child themselves, abandoning that child, and then that child repeating what their father who has abandoned them did, resorting to crime, and then probably being processed in the prison system. And this is why there are more blacks in US prisons. It's not because they're being targeted. If you don't do the crime, you won't do the time. Bad life choices are the reason these situations are created. I personally believe white privilege is not real. How can you compare the poor white man living below the poverty line to the successful black superstar football player or the black or Asian successful businessman? Are you going to say that poor white man living below the poverty line has white privilege over those people? Where do you draw the line? Where does it become, well, you have to be earning over a certain amount of money and then you have white privilege, or you don't have white privilege? This fascination by the Marxist left to group people and to point the finger at and to basically blame everyone else for our own personal choices, I think is shocking. Yes, sometimes things do not go our way for no fault of our own. Sometimes this happens. This is how life plays out. But it is no excuse to resort to crime. Resorting to crime is a poor life choice. And if you resort to crime, there's a high likelihood that if you're in the US resorting to crime, you probably will get shot at by a police officer. Easy way to avoid being shot at by a police officer is stay out of trouble. Easy way to avoid getting into problems in the US is to take responsibility. If you're going to have children, Make sure that you have children and you bring them up in a family environment. I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to be married, but I'm suggesting that the father needs to be there every single day of that child's life. Not part-time, not occasionally, not every few months he sees the child. Every single day. If it's not possible every single day, as much as you goddamn can do. Because if you don't, you're failing that child, and that child will grow up, and there's a high probability he will resort to crime, and he will end up in the US prison system, or the UK prison system, or any prison system around the world. And this doesn't just apply to black people, this applies to all races. And this also applies to rich people who seem to think it's acceptable to throw money at their kids and not spend any time with them. When you do that, what generally happens, your kids grow up and they turn into individuals like Antifa. I don't think you want your kids to turn into wet idiots like Antifa. That's not a good idea. These kids have never had anyone say no to them. They turn out like this.
So thankfully most of the protesters are in Trafalgar Square. It's not such a large protest. I think a lot of people have gone home. On my way here, it's about 7:30. On my way here, I saw a lot of people disbanding, going over the bridges, going home. Probably got tired, hungry, thirsty, needing the toilet, you name it. Now the focus seems to be a little bit outside Downing Street, but not that many. What they've been quite clever, they've done double barriers. So this time they're not really going to get through the barriers. I had heard on the radio that someone had tried jumping the barrier and was quickly arrested. I applaud the Metropolitan Police for doing that. I do keep having to watch my back because I know that Antifa are looking for anyone that stands out like a sore thumb. You can spot them because they're all wearing masks. I've got no reason to cover my face.
In that research, he found that blacks were treated differently when it came to aggressive policing, but for the most egregious shootings, he found no difference. That's what that study showed.
Well, based on what? Just generally? Or are we talking about high crime areas? Are we talking about police officers being under attack? Because let's go back to where this whole thing started in Ferguson, Missouri. The lie was hands up, don't shoot.
Lumping a whole bunch of things into one. If we can do one specific
That's
thing
where this whole phony movement started. It started out as hands up, don't shoot.
You're talking about Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Okay. So if you want to, you would need to speak to someone who is a member of Black Lives Matter about whether they have perpetrated a fraud on the American people. That's up to Black Lives Matter. That's not me. I'm neither a member of Black Lives Matter, I'm neither a supporter or someone who doesn't support them. I simply report on Black Lives Matter.
Do you condemn the anti-police rhetoric coming from this hateful ideology?
As a journalist sitting here on television, I don't have to condemn anyone, anything. That is something that you should ask other people around the country.
I condemn
their jobs to condemn
just
that.
like I condemn the hateful ideology out of groups like the KKK. All right? I condemn it. There is no place in American discourse for that sort of vile, vitriolic hate coming out of this ideology. This has fueled and fanned the flames of this anger toward the American police officer. There's only one group in America, one time, that truly cares about the lives of black people in these urban ghettos. And it's the American police officer who goes down there on a daily basis, puts their life on the line to protect who? Black people. So when you say we just want to have a conversation, let's have a conversation about the black on black crime, which kills more black males, which is more of a threat to any black male in the United States than a law enforcement officer.
Sheriff, yes, that's a different conversation. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's an issue when it comes to violence. Black on black crime, or it's crime. White people kill white people, tend to kill white people. Black people tend to kill black people.
Not in the numbers.
That's fine, but that's a different
I don't care
conversation.
who white
That is
people
a
are killing.
different conversation than police brutality, and we're not having that conversation right now. And again, I want to be very clear with you. I condemn all violence of any type, just for the record.
Was the situation between Mike Brown and Darren Wilson, was that police brutality?
But we're not talking about Mike
Yes
Brown
or
and
no?
Darren Wilson.
I am.
No, if you're asking me what the Justice Department showed, the Justice Department showed that it exonerated Officer Darren Wilson, and that the hands up, don't shoot narrative was a false narrative. That has been reported by CNN and by others.
And that was another phony report.
What does that have to do with Baton Rouge, Louisiana?
All right, because when you take in
what does that have to do with Baton Rouge, Louisiana?
Rates of involvement in violent crime, and crime in general, but violent crime, you're going to see that black males are overrepresented. Overrepresented in terms of being involved in violent crime. That's going to mean more arrests. That's going to mean more people going to prison. This stuff has already been debunked.
Sheriff, that's a different conversation.
Every time you don't have a response to something I say, you say it's a different conversation.
I don't have a response to you. Is that we're having two different conversations. I'm asking the questions here. You're answering the questions by asking questions about some other subject that we're not discussing.
We're talking about this hateful ideology called Black Lives Matter. You said you're not a member. You can't be a member. It's not an organization.
There's
no structure.
That's what you're talking about.
It is an ideology, and it is a hateful ideology.
I understand it's a very stressful time for you.
These individuals.
And Sheriff, we appreciate you coming on.
They preach vile and vitriol in the name of virtue.
Yeah, thank you, Sheriff. We appreciate it.
It seems like there's something just happened. Everyone's sort of running that way, and to be honest, I don't really want any part of it. But what was crowded outside Downing Street a moment ago is suddenly empty, and now basically people who are looking for riots are running that way.
This is the reason they were running. This was happening just up the road from me. I got this off Twitter, and this is what everyone was running for. The police had made an arrest on someone, and then suddenly everyone starts attacking the police. So the police start running down the street towards Whitehall, hence the reason everyone was running away from Downing Street up towards this action.
Run, Piggy, run!
And something's broken out. I saw the officers tap their heads. That generally means they're probably going to be put on riot gear.
So what I was unaware of was the reason why everyone was suddenly around the Horse Guards entrance, just up between Downing Street and Parliament Square. At this moment, those attacks were going on against these police officers. The police were regrouping, and eventually they would get into their riot gear and escort a lot of people out of the city. A number of arrests get made later in the evening. I only know this because I read it on Twitter. Certainly the BBC rarely reports on this. I think anytime someone vandalizes one of these monuments, anytime someone throws something, the police should be arresting them on sight. There's too much cautious policing, and that's all because of Commissioner Dick. And that's literally her name. Her name is Commissioner Dick. She is clearly inadequate at her job, and she needs to go.
basically tells you a lot. This is teenagers, this is idiots, this is people thinking it's acceptable to play riots in the middle of London, shut down, when there's a lockdown supposedly going on. I think it's acceptable to play little riot games.
This was filmed on the 7th of June. Only yesterday, when the cenotaph right in front of us was vandalised, marked the 76th anniversary of D-Day. On that day, on June 6, 1944, more than 160,000 Allied troops landed along a 50-mile stretch of heavily fortified French coastline to fight Nazi Germany on the beaches of Normandy, France. US General Dwight Eisenhower referred to the operation as a crusade in which we will accept nothing but full victory. More than 5,000 ships and 13,000 aircraft supported the D-Day invasion, and by the day's end, the Allies gained a foothold in continental Europe. Though the cost in lives was high, more than 9,000 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded. For another 100,000 soldiers, it was the start of a long, hard march across Europe in the final push to defeat Adolf Hitler's Germany. And yet, today and the day before, we have absolute morons vandalising the cenotaph, Winston Churchill, Lincoln, Gandhi, and by the looks of it, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, the London Metropolitan Police, they seem to let this rabble do as they please. It does make you wonder why our great-grandfathers bothered to take up arms when you think about the way things have turned out. It just makes you wonder how ungrateful these people are. Because the reality is, none of these people would exist if it wasn't for Winston Churchill.
But I hate to say it, but in normal protests, you wouldn't have the need to watch your back. You wouldn't have the need to think, hang on, are people carrying weapons? But there's a high risk here. There's a high risk that people are carrying weapons and people are looking to cause trouble. Okay, so it's definitely thinned out. I think the rabble are basically sort of focused in that area. I think unless there's anything more going in Trafalgar Square, I might just head off. But it's just a lot of people wasting their time. So let's see. Thankfully, Parliament Square has thinned out. The officers are still guarding Winston Churchill, but the damage has already been done. Every single statue has been desecrated.
I'm part of it. I'm part of it. I'm in it. I'm in it.
And there you have it. A lot of pointless vandalism. Down in Pacific, been vandalized for the second day in a row. It's definitely thinning out now. There's a small disturbance over there, but leave them to it. It seems the Metropolitan Police are handling it. Doesn't seem like there's any horses today. Thankfully, well, not thankfully, it seems to be coming to an end. Wasted afternoon for these people. And it was just, for me, it was just a walk down the road.